a Japanese art historian. I'm just going to share my screen so you don't have to look at me quite so closely. As a Japanese art historian, I love visiting Japan, and I love so many different aspects of Japanese art and culture that whenever I get to Japan, I can't wait to visit various different museums along my path. And in Japan, there are so many different types of museums all over the country, and they come in different sizes. There are huge museums like Tokyo National Museum. They're very tiny museums, very small, very unique museums, both public and private. And some museums have very broad collections, very encyclopedic collections, but others are devoted to a very particular type of art, like lacquer or a type of ceramic, or to a specific artist. So they're very, very focused collections. And many of the museums are built by the world's foremost architects. So the museums themselves are often works of art. And as you'll see from the series of videos, but also from one of the museums or two of the museums that I show you today, many of Japan's museums are beautifully integrated and very deliberately integrated with the natural environment as well. That's what you're seeing on the screen here at the Nezu Museum, which we'll discuss in a moment. Now, this series of videos, the Doors to the Arts of Japan series, is a wonderful series of quite a lot of videos. 24 of them are devoted to Japan's museums, and these were created during the COVID lockdowns by Japan Foundation in order to introduce people around the world to various different aspects of Japanese art, but also to its museums, which are extraordinary. And as you can see from the screen page, the screenshot I took from the website, there are quite a variety of museums in Japan. And this series of 24 short videos, they're all under 10 minutes. So they're very watchable when you have a minute. They explore various different aspects of Japan's museums, and some of them explore their relationship between the museums and their natural surroundings, which is really interesting and often a very key part of the museum's creation and its philosophy. Others explore the creators of the museum, and you actually hear from the architects and designers of the museum as to why they created it the way they did. Other videos focus on the actual artist and the art that is the focus of the museum. And in some cases, the videos combine all of these aspects. So in this final lecture in the mini lecture series for Japan Foundation LA, I'm going to share with you 3 of my favorite museums, as well as just to share with you the museums I've learned about from this series of videos that I'm now hoping to go to on my next trip to Japan. So we're going to start with the Nezu Museum, which is the one that you saw in the introduction image. And this is a museum in Tokyo, one that I visited several times. It's in the Minami Aoyama district of Tokyo, a very, very, very fashionable, very elegant part of Tokyo, a shopping district. The museum was designed by Kuma Kengo, one of Japan's top architects, in 2009. It has been around much longer, but it was given this permanent and very beautiful home by one of the world's greatest architects. And I'm sure you can see just from looking at this image how beautifully he considered the integration of the architecture, the art, and the natural landscape around it. It has a very beautiful traditional Japanese garden right beside it. And the building itself, it takes a lot from traditional Japanese architecture. There's a wonderful video here that introduces Kuma Kengo and his philosophy and how he approached creating this museum. It's in a very bustling commercial part of Tokyo, and it's all about shopping in this part of Tokyo. It has some of the best fashion designers, Issey Miyake, Hanae Mori, various boutiques nearby, cafes, lots of shops and businesses. So what he was really keen on doing for this museum was creating a way that visitors from the outside, from this bustling part of Tokyo, could come in and kind of slow themselves down and calm down so that they were ready to see the art inside the museum. So he created this wonderful walkway that is lined with a bamboo wall here. That's part of the building itself, and a living bamboo wall on the right side, so that as you pass from the outside world, the commercial, bustling outside world, you walk along this path and you ready yourself emotionally and spiritually for the experience of viewing the art in the museum. It's kind of like the walking along the roji path in a traditional Japanese garden when you're heading into the tea ceremony. It's a very similar sort of approach to stilling the mind and readying the spirit. And once you get into the museum itself, he has created a beautiful display, a beautiful interior space to display this wonderful collection of art. And you can see the main hall here where he has played very carefully with light so that most of the artwork here is displayed using natural light only. Now, as you can see here, the collection of the Nezu Museum it includes some Buddhist sculpture. You can see some works here on display in the main hall. The collection was built up originally by a businessman called Nezu Kaiichiro, and he ran a railroad, the Tobu Railroad, and made his fortune through the railroad at a very important time when Japan was establishing the railroad in the Meiji period. And he was very interested in art and built up a quite extraordinary collection of Japanese art objects and art from other parts of Asia. The total collection now is 7,400 objects, but most of which he assembled. And later in his life, he became particularly interested in the tea ceremony. So he added a lot of tea ceremony related artworks and vessels to his collection, and you'll see some today. The collection has become so significant because of the quality of the objects and the importance of the objects that it is really one of the top museums in Japan to see Japanese art. In fact, it includes 7 national treasures and 88 important cultural properties, and these are designations given by the government of Japan to basically acknowledge the importance and the beauty of these artworks. So this is Nezu Kaiichiro here. And he died in 1940. His collection was already mostly assembled by then. His family went on to look after it and house it in this space, in this site for many years. And eventually in the early 2000s, they hired Kuma Kengo to build this beautiful museum for it. And these are 3 of the most famous objects in the collection. This is a painting that dates back to the Kamakura period of a waterfall. This is one of Japan's most sacred waterfalls, the Nachi waterfall. It's very well-known, important pilgrimage spot. And this dates to the Kamakura period. Is a very, very rare landscape in ink on silk from this period, and it is it's one of the national treasures in the collection that I mentioned. I haven't actually seen this one yet, but I'm hoping I get to see it on one of my next visits. This is a beautiful lacquer box that dates to the 15th century at the peak, at the height, or almost the height of Japanese lacquer production. And it has on its cover a scene of deer on a mountain landscape with autumn grasses and a beautiful autumn moon. And it's a really exquisite example of makie lacquer, which is lacquer that has pictures built up by sprinkling powders of precious materials like gold and silver. And I think the moon here is actually made of pewter or some other unusual metal. And it's a beautiful example of a landscape on a functional object. It's a really exquisite work of art, and it's an important cultural property. And it's over 500 years old. Over on the right is a tea bowl that looks a little less exciting perhaps than the others, but it is an exciting tea bowl. I was certainly excited when I first saw it and met it for myself for the first time. It is a 16th century tea bowl. It's a Korean bowl, actually. It's an Edo Jawan, an Edo tea bowl, and it's called shibata. Many of these old tea bowls have a personal name. And this one, this is a type of tea bowl that was originally in Korea. It was made in Korea as a rice bowl, but these very rough, very simple looking tea bowls were so highly prized by tea masters in the 16th century, such as Sennorikyu, that they collected them for use in the tea ceremony and elevated them from the position of a humble rice bowl into that of a tea bowl, which is the most prized possession in the tea ceremony, and the one that holds the tea, and the one that the host uses to serve the tea in it to esteemed guests. And so I was excited to see this particular shibata tea bowl because I had written my master's thesis on tea bowls, and this was one of the tea bowls that I had showcased in my thesis. So when I met it in person, I got unreasonably excited. Now, this is probably the most famous work of art in the Nezu Museum's collection, and you can only see it if you go to the Nezu Museum in May, because that's when they display irises. Irises have long been associated with the month of May, the 5th month in Japan. And so they are only brought out in May. And I have never been to the Nezu Museum in May. So that is something that's a definite bucket list for me, because this is an exquisite pair of painted folded screens by Ogata Korin, who's one of Japan's most wonderful painters, wonderful artists working in the 18th century. And the pair of screens represents, well, basically it's a field, a marsh full of irises. The irises are depicted with the simple green and sort of purplish blue pigments onto gold leaf. And they're depicted very rhythmically across the surface so that they look as if they're planted naturally on the screen. And they have a very important poetic reference. Most Japanese people, educated Japanese people, will see this and say, kakitsubata, which is one of the Japanese words for an iris, but it also relates to a poem that was written many centuries ago, I think in the 8th century. And it was about a courtier, by a courtier who had been banished from the capital. And he finds himself staring down at this on a 8-panel wooden bridge, staring down at this marsh full of beautiful purple irises. And he creates a poem formed by each of the syllables of the word. It's formed with each line starting with a syllable from the word kakitsubata. And this is a very important classical poem in the Japanese literary canon. So here it is represented on screen. So there are layers of importance, cultural importance here. But what this screen in this pair of screens in this museum's collection taught me was that in Japanese museums, perhaps more so than anywhere else in the world, is there a seasonality to the exhibiting of artworks. You can only see certain artworks during certain seasons of the year. So this is something that deepened my understanding of the importance of the seasons in Japanese culture. Now, the second museum that I really enjoy visiting is the Nihon Mingeikan, which is the Japan Folk Crafts Museum also in Tokyo. And it was founded in 1936. This is the original old building that was created to house it in. And it was important that the building be beautifully constructed using expert craftspeople in different skills in stone and wood. Because it was created to house folk art and basically kind of help share the philosophy of Yanagi Soetsu, also known as Yanagi Muneyoshi, who was an art critic and enthusiast and philosopher, and the man who actually coined the Japanese word mingei, which didn't exist before 1925. He created the word mingei to refer to art, the art of the ordinary people, utilitarian art that has it's functional and beautiful, or objects that are functional and beautiful. And he worked with his colleagues, various artists like Kawai Kanjiro and Hamada Shoji, even Bernard Leach from England, and Shiko Munakata, the printmaker, Serizawa Keisuke, the textile designer, to promote and collect the folk arts of Japan and other parts of the world, and to encourage the idea that folk art is as valid as any other type of art, and to encourage people to find beauty in everyday life. He's written a very important book, The Unknown Craftsman, that really sort of explains his philosophy, and illustrated by beautiful works, many of which are now in this museum. So this is a view of the interior when you enter the museum. It has been beautifully constructed with these oak, or this oak staircase and oak panels everywhere. He was very involved in the construction of the museum itself, and of all, he designed the various shelves that the objects are displayed on. Here you can see that the range of objects is quite broad. You can see there are textiles, paintings, ceramics, other artworks, and there's even a fan or a hat on the wall there. Many different types of objects. And the museum has a collection of over 17,000 total. Some of them are old antique folk art, and others are newly made by today's crafts artists. And they also collect folk art from Asia and other parts of the world as well. And there's a lot of English ceramics, English slipware. I think part of the influence of Bernard Leach on this project. Now, these are two objects that you can see in the Mingyekang. One is a bamboo basket that was used for holding bamboo shoots, so that when you're picking your bamboo shoots, you can carry them in this basket, I think it's an interesting idea that you create a basket out of the parent plant in order to carry the bamboo shoots, the baby plants in. But look how beautiful this is. Its patina is absolutely gorgeous. The bamboo was probably lacquered to create this effect, or it possibly got this sort of patina from smoke, but it may well have been lacquered. This is a beautiful tool. It's a carpenter's tool that's used to create ink lines for measuring. And you would put the ink in here, and this is the handle, and this is where it rolls along the surface, and the ink creates the mark. But it has been carved in the shape of a prawn, so or a shrimp. So a lot of beauty in this functional object. So these are kind of quintessential Mingei objects. They are a combination of the beautiful and the utilitarian. So it's a functional basket. This is a carpenter's tool, but they're also beautiful works of art. This was the essence of Mingei. These are two more lovely objects in the Mingei Museum's collection. The painting of the Buddha on the left here is from the 17th century, and it's a folk painting of the Buddha, and it's part of a larger a whole tradition called Otsue. And Otsue are these folk paintings that were created in the town of Otsu, which is very close to Kyoto. And they were sold as souvenirs to travelers passing through the town. And I worked very closely with these folk paintings. I curated an exhibition in 1999 and wrote a catalog. And for the exhibition, I actually reached out to this museum and asked if we could borrow this painting. And they are so delicate and rare that they were happy to lend the images, but couldn't lend these paintings. But they sent us photographs of the various paintings that I asked for. So we were able to include them in the book and in the exhibition. So I'm very fond of this particular folk Buddhist painting. And then on the right here is very dazzling textile. This is a cotton bed cover of Tonji. It would have covered the futon and would have probably been a wedding gift. It is decorated with these beautiful sort of ribbon design. It's cotton, but it's decorated with designs made of indigo and other dyes applied using the tsutugaki sort of paste resist technique that is very common on cotton textiles, and creates these beautiful, very dynamic, these dynamic designs. They're not as highly refined and elegant as silk kimono designs, but they're very bold and they're very dynamic. That's something you see a lot in folk art. Now, the third place that I would call a museum, it's actually it's sort of a living museum. This whole island has been turned into a museum. This is the Benesse art site Naoshima. The island is Naoshima, and it was recently basically revitalized into this amazing art island that is a must-see place for contemporary art lovers and people who love beautiful landscape and people who love art and nature coming together in interesting ways. And this is a view from the beach of Naoshima out over the Seto Inland Sea, which is where the island is located. And most of you probably recognize this to be a sculpture by Yayoi Kusama, who is a wonderful artist. She created this pumpkin sculpture for the wharf of Naoshima. Sadly, it was actually blown away in a typhoon in 2021, but they've replaced it with, and damaged, I think they recovered it, but they've had to replace it with a new pumpkin, but this is the original pumpkin. The Benesse House was first established on the island in 1992 by the Benesse Foundation. They were basically a foundation that they were earned their money from a publishing, huge publishing project. Well, they basically were publishers and made a lot of education publication and made a lot of money and put it into revitalizing these islands, this Naoshima and a couple of other islands, with these incredible art projects. So they first established a hotel on Naoshima, the Benesse House Hotel and the Benesse Art Museum and beach and this oval structure as well. And they hired the architect Ando Tadao, better known in the West as Tadao Ando. He's one of Japan's great architects, to build all of the main structures. And this is a beautiful view that you see, I think, just going into the restaurant of the hotel. The evening light was coming through the white walls. I guess there were sort of like shoji windows, and shining, the pine trees were being reflected here. And I thought this looked just like a folding screen. It was just exquisite. I'm sure it was all planned very carefully that way. He is a master of light, and all of his structures play with light so beautifully. But this, to me, was an exquisite moment of shadow and light making a work of art on concrete. He does amazing things with concrete. Now, when you stay in the Benesse House Hotel, there's art in your room. I was able to stay because I was the study leader on a couple of tours with the Santa Barbara Museum, a couple of occasions, and we all stayed in a room that had art by famous artists, and all around us on the island were works of art by major international artists. In the museum itself were works by Hiroshi Sugimoto, Kan Yasuda, an amazing sculpture, Richard Long and his wonderful works in wood. And outside, this is the hotel that one of the areas where you can stay, and you look out at various sculptures outside, and the museums are up that away. And all around you outside are sculptures made by renowned world artists. This is Niki de Saint-Phal and her very playful cat sculpture here from 1992, made for the opening of the Benesse House here. And these are works by George Rickey, who's an American sculptor, and this is what his works look like when the sun's going down and the sun is reflected on the metal surface. They're just extraordinary. When you go up to the museum, the Benesse House Museum, you see, as I mentioned, works by a number of different international artists, including Hiroshi Sugimoto. And these are two of the photographs of Sugimoto's that are exhibited on the outside of the building, which is unusual. There are several from his series of seascapes, some of his most beautiful and well-known photographs of where the sky meets the sea along the horizon line. And you can look at these while you're also looking out across the Seto Inland Sea and looking at this amazing seascape in real life. And I have to say, I call Naoshima my happy place, because I can't imagine anywhere more exquisitely beautiful. It's the landscape is beautiful, the art is beautiful, the concepts all around you are so beautifully thought out and executed. And one more aspect of Naoshima that I find particularly wonderful is that the island has been abandoned, like many parts of Japan, where industry has dwindled over the decades. Young people have moved out of the countryside and have gone to work in the cities, and a lot of old homes have been abandoned. So on Naoshima, the whole Benesse art project they've taken some of these old houses, these old yakisugi homes that are 300-400 years old, and they have bought them, and they now invite artists to create installations inside them. So you can walk through the village and you use a map to find your way to amazing art installations inside these beautiful old Japanese traditional homes. So it's an extraordinary experience where you're you're constantly being challenged to see art everywhere, and it's really not difficult. Everything is beautiful. Even this flower arrangement here on a window bar is exquisite. And then finally on Naoshima, there's a sort of museum within a museum. There's several different museums on the island, and this is the Chichu Museum, which means under the underground. And this is another structure built by Ando Tadao in 2004. And you can go into this museum and you see the artworks of just 3 or 4 artists. There's James Turrell, who's a great artist who plays with light. And so you can imagine Ando Tadao and James Turrell working together to figure out how to do new things with light that have never been done before. And it is an extraordinary experience. Walter de Maria and his sculptures. And there's also a room that is just basically lined with paintings of Monet's water lilies, which seems out of place here, but it actually really works. It's quite extraordinary. So these are my favorite museums that I always love to get to when I go to Japan. Here is me going into I believe this is me going into the Chichu Museum to be surrounded by Ando Tadao's amazing architecture. I'm not a big fan of concrete architecture, but he does something quite extraordinary with it. And I'm going to end here with the 3 museums that I learned about from this series of videos from Japan Foundation, and that I now really want to go to when I'm next in Japan. And one is the Yayoi Kusama Museum in Tokyo. I had heard about it before, but it was wonderful to get an introduction to it through the video. And this is where Yayoi Kusama herself has created this museum to show her work. She is still at the age of, I think, 93, possibly more. I've lost track, but she's still going strong, creating her artwork every day. It keeps her alive, I think. And her art is absolutely fascinating. The patterns that she creates, the emotions that she processes through art is quite extraordinary. And I need to go into a space that is created by her the next time I'm in Tokyo. A little bit outside near Tokyo is Kanagawa. In Kanagawa is the Odawara Art Foundation Enoura Observatory, which I think I probably had heard about before, but seeing the video made me really want to go there, because this is an extraordinary project that is really being spearheaded by Hiroshi Sugimoto, the same photographer who does those seascapes. He has created quite an amazing combination of art project, landscape, observatory. So this is where on the winter solstice, he's had this structure, designed this structure so that at one moment during the winter solstice, the winter sun will shine through and create this wonderful sight. It's quite an extraordinary place. I'm going to let you watch the video and find out more about it, because I know that I certainly want to go there now that I've seen that. And then the final museum that I'd love to see next time I'm in the Kobe area is the Takenaka Carpentry Tools Museum. And this is a museum that is beautifully constructed, as you can imagine, because it's all about carpentry. So the building itself is exquisite. There are lots of examples of joinery and the bracketing that is used to hold up the roofs of heavy roofs of temples, for example, and the very unique types of joinery that have been invented in Japan and have been used in Japan for centuries, so that the carpenters don't even need to use nails. and also many of the tools that they've used. They're all on view in this beautiful museum. So I know that I definitely want to visit there next.